Hi. So today's video is going to be about Gregor Mendel. We're starting a new unit in genetics, and Gregor Mendel is the guy who figured out how inheritance works. So this whole video is dedicated to just him. So the title of our notes is Gregor Mendel, the man of the hour. And I'll show you a picture of what he looks like. And then I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him. So Gregor Mendel, he is from Austria, and he was actually an Austrian monk, and he lived during the 1800s. Okay. Specifically, his discoveries were made in the 1860s. Okay, so that's what he looked like. So he's an Austrian monk. Um, and I want to say that a lot of times during these, this time, it was common that monks were the ones who were this also scientists. And that's because a monk's life was just dedicated to spending your whole day praying. And so monks, they don't have material items, they don't have a lot of entertainment in their life other than just praying and meditating all day. And so they had a lot of time to think and wonder, and they had a lot of time to do experiments. And so that's what Gregor Mendel did. He spent a lot of time wondering about how um, offspring got traits from their parents and how that whole system works. And so another thing about Gregor Mendel is that he was an avid gardener. Okay, so he knew a lot about plants. Okay, so he was a botanist in a way. And he had a big garden, which was also very common about monks. Like I said, they have time to do stuff like that. And so because he was a botanist, he knew how plants reproduced and he knew how to mate plants with each other. Okay. So that's very important. The other big thing about Mendel is that he was also a mathematician. And so he had spent many years studying mathematics and learning about statistics and probability. And he was really the first scientist who connected math with biology. So he was the first one who put a mathematical model on a biological phenomenon. And then using the math, he was able to to see patterns emerge. Okay, using numbers, he got to see the patterns, and the patterns is what helped him explain how genetics works. So he was also a mathematician. Um, and I want to say that he was the oops, first one to apply statistics to biology to explain phenomenon. Okay, and the phenomenon he's explaining is inheritance. Okay, so I'm going to write that down. Inheritance means passing down genes from parent to offspring. Okay, and so what I'd like to say is that, so I'm going to say it was in the 1866 that he published his paper. He published his paper explaining inheritance, how inheritance works. Okay, and so in this paper, which is famous, and the first time anyone was able to describe the mechanism of inheritance, he talked about something called heritable factors. Okay, and so looking at these plants and breeding plants, he was able to see that there was a factor that was coming from parent to offspring. Okay, so in his paper, he describes heritable factors. Okay, and heritable factors we now know are genes. Of as genes. Okay, at the time, No one knew about DNA. No one knew how genes worked, and no one knew what a gene was. He didn't. And so he describes this thing called heritable factors that goes from parent to offspring. And now we know what those are. They're called genes. And so now we can they're a physical thing that we can actually sequence and look at. So that was pretty cool. And so I want to say that the way he figured out how inheritance works is he used the pea plant. Okay, so he used pea plants for his experiments. And the reason he used the pea plant is because they were easy to cultivate, which means they were easy to mate and they were easy to grow and they had a very fast generation time. So they were easy to grow, easy to cultivate, and had a quick generation time. So, for example, what he would do is he would mate two plants, and within a couple of weeks, he could see what the offspring had in terms of traits that he was looking at. Um, and imagine if somebody was doing experiments on humans, you would have to wait, 25 years for the next generation because, adults can't have kids until they're about 25 years old, or actually earlier, but still, you would have to wait years and years. Or with plants, you just had to wait a couple of weeks. So he could get a new generation every couple of weeks, which meant he could collect a ton of data. And he did. He did thousands of experiments. Okay. So he did thousands of experiments on pea plants. And he was looking at specific traits. Okay. He observed, I'll say he collected data. In his experiments, the dependent variable, which is what you're measuring, were these things. Okay, so in his experiments, the dependent variable that he measured were the following. Okay, these following traits. In the plants, he would look at flower color, he would look at seed color, he looked at pod texture. So peas come in a pod, as you probably know, and the pods are sometimes constricted, so they're like really flat, but sometimes they're inflated like a little balloon. So that was in it. That was a gene that he looked at. Another trait was pod color. Another trait was location of the flower. So sometimes the flower would be at the tip of the branch, sometimes the flower would be in the middle of the branch, things like that. Okay, so those are just a few of the dependent variables that he looked at. There were more, but I just wanted to point out that what he would do is he would take a plant, for example, with purple flowers, and then he would mate it with a plant with white flowers, and then he would look at the offspring. Okay, and so I'm just going to write that down. So an example of one of his experiments is that he would take a plant with purple flowers and a plant with white flowers and cross them. Okay. And then he would measure what the offspring had. He would measure what color the flowers were in the offspring. Okay. And so to mate plants, this is what you do. Um, the flower is the reproductive part of a plant, and the pollen is the sperm, and the eggs are actually inside the flower. Okay, so when you look at a flower, there's this middle part called a stamen. I'm sorry, the middle part is called a pistil, and you put the pollen, which is the sperm, on top of the pistil, and the eggs are inside the pistil. So then the sperm crawl all the way down the pistil into the egg, fertilize the egg. And then you have a fertilized egg, which is essentially a baby. And then that baby turns into a seed. Now you have a seed, which is a new offspring, and you grow the seed up and you see what flowers the offspring has. Okay. So that's how we would do it. And so, that's how his experiments were. Okay, so in the next video, I will explain specifically what he did, or like what he found. Okay? All right. So see you in the next video.